In telling stories, there's many ways to start off by doing it. We've seen a lot of examples. We've seen a lot of different ways of doing it. But when you're telling a good story, there's two things that I think we can keep in mind. First is what I would call the question. Now, the question doesn't have to necessarily mean what we traditionally think of as a question. Basically what it is it is a reason to get the reader interested, the listener interested. It's something that's going to make the reader want to pay attention to the story. The other part I call the answer. Now, the answer is a reason why it is worthwhile for the listener to go through with the story. What is it, the point of the story? What has this given the listener? Now, this answer needs to give the reader some kind of feeling, some kind of means of conveying a message to the reader. Now, the thing is that this is tricky because you can actually apply this to a lot of different types of stories. Some stories, for example, like The Telltale Heart, opens up a lot of open-ended questions. What happened next? Why did this happen? The thing is, it still conveys some kind of meaningfulness to the reader that makes it feel worthwhile to the story. Now, I'll connect this to a personal anecdote. So, start off, I will go with the setting. Very classic way of telling a story. As I was in freshman year, as I was sitting in senior year, I was thinking of doing a prank. And the story is about the greatest prank of my life. I sat there with my friend Aaron in the library. Day was getting long. I'd already gotten accepted into college, and I was getting bored. And I wanted to do some kind of prank. So I thought back to freshman year, and I thought about paper. Now, in freshman year, I was sitting in a class with my friend. And to give a little bit of a disclaimer, this story is a little bit inappropriate, but we were sitting in class and we realized that if you printed out something on a piece of paper, you could take that piece of paper, put it back into the bottom of the printer where the rest of the paper was, and the next thing that it would get printed out on would have it on the back. So going back to senior year, I'm sitting there, and my friend Aaron and I think, well, what can we write on this piece of paper? I wanted to be inappropriate enough to be funny, but not inappropriate enough to get me in trouble. So I wrote D-O-N-G, dong, on paper. I know, a little bit inappropriate, but so what we do is we take this piece of paper, and we look at it, and we make it not too light, not too dark. We didn't want it to be noticeable, but we didn't want it to be so you couldn't see it at all. Essentially like a watermark. And so what we do is we take this Word document, we print out 300 copies on here, and we send it off. Now, at this point, I have laid out the beginning of my story. I have hopefully tried to get you to ask some kind of questions about the story. Why is this happening? Where's the story going? What can we get from this? Hopefully to get the reader to kind of join in. Now, so next what happened is after we sent that off, you can fast forward to the next morning. So the next morning I'm sitting, and it's probably close to about lunchtime at this time, and I'm sitting down in our common room, and I'm doing some boring math homework or something like that, and I feel a hand just come grab me by the back of my neck and pull me out of my chair and drag me down to the principal's office. And I'm sitting there with the vice principal, and she says, "What have you done?" And I'm like, I'm sitting around thinking to myself, I don't really know what's going on. I can't really think. And she ends up telling me, apparently one of the freshman English teachers brought all 60 of her freshman students in, and each of them had a 5-page paper to print out. Now you can kind of see where this is going, and apparently it caused chaos. Apparently people were running around the library thinking their computers were hacked because it said dong in the back of all their final papers. Apparently it got so pushed through that even in one of the speech classes that my brother was in, he said that he had it on the back. One of the kids had it on the back of his paper, and everybody was freaking out. Now in the end, I ended up getting banned from the library for about a week. But in the end, I think it was worth it. Now, looking back at my story, kind of taking it apart, is you can look at a couple of pieces of it, right? So in the beginning, I gave you, like I said, hopefully try to make the question for you. In my second phase, in my execution, when we ended up following through with the prank and there's all these problems that came of it, was hopefully trying to get you to get some kind of value from that story. And as you can see in the conclusion, I got in trouble. Now, this could be relatable to you. You could find this to be a funny prank, or you could not at all. That's what I think is the value of good storytelling is that you can take a story and it can have many different elements in it. But what matters about it is, do you get the reader to pay attention to the story? Going through the story, you can have any number of things happen. And this is a lot of things that I think authors try and mix about and try and change in the way that we read it, is all the in-between points, that is up to the author. How you get somebody drawn into the story, and how you get that end piece where the reader has some kind of feeling at the end of it. The goal of my story is for you to think it's funny. You might not think it's funny, maybe you find it clever, maybe you find something else, but the goal of my story, and hopefully with a good story, is to give you, the listener, the reader, some kind of value, some kind of benefit from my story. And I think that is the one thing that we can always pay attention to and draw a good story from. Getting that introduction, getting some kind of way to get the reader in, and getting some kind of value at the end. As long as that happens for the reader and the listener, as an author, that is the elements that constitute a good story. And by playing with those pieces in the middle, say if I had told you about the end of my story first, well, maybe that would have brought the reader in, maybe, or the listener in. Maybe if I had ended with how I had come up with the idea, I could manipulate my story and make it some kind of value for the listener, and maybe you could still call it a good story. It really all depends about the order and everything like that. But I think those two elements are what truly makes a good story. Giving the reader a reason to pay attention, and giving some kind of benefit at the end, some kind of value to the listener. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you have enjoyed my presentation.